The Department of Justice and Constitutional Development is working on laws that will provide full protection for whistleblowers. This comes as the current Protected Disclosures Act of 2000 was heavily criticized by the State Capture Commission. The current act has proven not to protect those that are blowing the whistle on crime. Joining us now for more on this is Dr. Kershen Pillay, who's an activist and the CEO of the Graduate Institute of Financial Sciences. Doc, good morning and good afternoon, rather, and thank you so much for making time for us this afternoon. So when it comes to the lapses with the current legislature, where are those? Because there is the recommendations that have been made by Chief Justice, that is the chair of the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, Justice Zondo, that there should also be incentives for whistleblowers.
I think that it is a very good point to highlight that there needs to be rewards and incentives for whistleblowers, because we must understand that corruption is so well financed. And in order for us to try to counter that, although it sounds terrible that we need to reward people for being ethical and honest, unfortunately, if we look at studies coming out of India, Brazil, and many other countries that used incentive schemes, it works. So I definitely echo the sentiments of Chief Justice that we do need to put in incentive schemes, because corruption is a funded process, and anti-corruption should also be funded through some sort of reward and incentive scheme.
Yeah, and if we look at those international comparisons, when it comes to the money that is used as a reward to incentivize whistleblowing, how would that flow, and which department would be in charge of something like that? Does it still fall under, for instance, the police, or would it be under a different institution? Also, and I'm also basing this on the argument that police themselves are found to be corrupt. Well, some at least.
Aldrin, I think that's also another good point that you brought up. But in the empirical data that we've looked at, civil society plays a critical role in this. And in South Africa, we are very fortunate. We have amazing civil society agencies that can handle the funding and the distribution of incentive schemes. We have organizations like ARTA, Corruption Watch, and many, many, many more organizations that are more than capable of facilitating and managing rewards and incentive schemes for whistleblowers.
Yeah, and again, like if you look at a slush fund as an example, which just almost plays quite a similar role, and we've seen the corruption there. And I don't know if we extend it to civil society with public money, if that is the right approach.
I think for me, I can only base it on the data and the research that is done. And every organization, every country has a different context. And South Africa will be no different. But I think there's a start that needs to come through. But more than wanting us to start saying that, oh, we must get money from government and it must be housed by civil society, there's another way to view this. In corporate South Africa, we have corporates or large organizations who are supposed to be captains of industries, ethical leaders. And in my view, when we have each sector, let's look at the education sector, let's look at the big names in the education sector. Why can't we as organizations within the education sector, why can't the corporates that are impacted by those different education entities rally together and create a fund? If I look at the financial services sector alone, we have large banks, we have large insurers. Each of them can commit to anti-corruption activities and manage their own incentive schemes. We have professional bodies that can do the same. So there's so many different approaches to it, Aldrin.
Yeah, and then when it comes to dealing with corruption and trying to almost come up with preventative measures, because on one end, and especially when you look at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry and some of the witnesses that were testifying, is that what they're also dealing with is a livelihood question, that if I do blow the whistle, are the chances very high that I could be fired or perhaps even lose my job? So how do we get to a point where an honest employee is not even faced with such a question?
Aldrin, I need a magic wand for that, but I can share two examples of whistleblowers. In fact, three examples. I was fortunate enough to be a part of a focus group that is putting research together. And this research is focusing on how do we eradicate corruption from the Department of Higher Education and Training. And through those focus groups, we identified one individual who supports a family. And because of speaking out, although found not guilty of any of the trumped-up charges that they brought against this individual no longer has the means to put bread and milk on the table of his family. We're talking about an individual that is highly educated, that has done what is necessary and what is right, and unfortunately is seen in society as a pariah. So when we look at all the policies that are in place to protect whistleblowers, we need to see it practically implemented. As whistleblowers need to feel the presence of protection, not hear of it and read about it on a piece of paper. So yes, there's beautiful policies in place to protect whistleblowers. South Africa has some amazing whistleblowing policies, but the implementation of it is lacking, and we need that to be fixed. So to answer your question, how do we protect someone from not being victimized after they speak out, not having their bread and butter becoming a matter of question? I can't give you the answer, but what I can say, everything centers around ethical leadership. If every ethical leader in this country, and if every leader in this country starts to purport ethical behavior, we will then see that change, because we are saying, not on our watch will you ill-treat this individual, will you victimize this person, will you try to attempt to kill or bully or victimize, whatever the case might be, but everything is centered around ethical leadership, Aldrin.
You look at the story of Advocate Corette Nudier, who was working with SARS and busy with a case with SARS, who was also gunned down. Then the question also becomes that when you look at those that are actually appointed to deal and investigate cases relating to corruption, how then do we protect them as well after the corruption has been committed? Because they also play quite a critical role when it comes to getting down to the finer details of how the crime was committed.
That's absolutely correct. So it's a vicious ecosystem, and that ecosystem needs to be broken. And as I said, Aldrin, I think the key message or the key takeaway that each and every one of us here as ordinary South Africans need to take in or to realize is that it stops and starts with us. Because the world is not destroyed by those that do evil. The world is destroyed by those who watch and do nothing. So as ordinary South Africans, in our numbers, we don't have to wait for the one brave soul to come up. As a collective, we are far more powerful than the minutiae of the corrupt in this country. And I believe that if we take a collective stand, we can fix it. And say no more Babita Deokarans, no more Krita Merez, no more Penwa Moromes. And that's the stance that we need to take. We need to mobilize as a country, and we need to mobilize as ordinary South Africans and say, not on my watch and not in my beautiful country will I allow a whistleblower to stand alone, because I too stand with this whistleblower. And it becomes very difficult then for you to victimize an entire nation, a community, an entire organization. It becomes very difficult for you to do that. But we need every South African to dig deep within themselves, remember their ethical values, and remember on what this democracy was built on in South Africa. And if we remember that, I think as South Africa, we can do very well.
Yeah. Finally, you mentioned Babita Deokaran was actually in conversation with Jeff Weeks from News 24 earlier this week, because he's been investigating this case now for the past 3 years. And one of the points that he raises is that when it comes to law enforcement, at least with the six accused and who were eventually convicted, the triggermen, it was the triggermen who were convicted, but we still don't know who the mastermind is. And when it comes to the law enforcement, especially with prosecution, with the prosecutors as well, how do we ensure that we get to a point where we also put a face and a name to who the mastermind is, and the mastermind is also held to book, and that law enforcement and the prosecutors are not just satisfied with the idea that at least there has been a conviction, even though that conviction was through a confession?
I think that's a great question. And we also understand that the wheels of justice move very, very slowly. And as a result of the wheels of justice moving very slowly, the corruptors and the corruptees know this and they understand this and they use the system to their advantage. And it all comes back to the central point that I highlight. And the central point that I'm highlighting is we have to have this collective working together. Right now, we have this overwhelming wave of corruption that is taking or being perpetrated by a very select and small network of people. And there's a far larger network of people that are not corrupt. And the only way we are going to fix this is if we rise together as a nation on the bedrock of ethical leadership, not leaving any person that stands up against wrongdoing and corruption alone. Because as you can see, 3 years later, what is the movement of it? Yeah. Yes, we have the gunmen, but they are not the orchestrators. Those people were guns for hire. There's going to be another group of people that can be guns for hire until we get to the root cause or to the captains or the masterminds behind this. That's the only time it can be unraveled. And if we as South Africa rally together, we can unravel it, because there'll be no place for corrupt activities and corrupt behaviors. It may sound idealistic, it may sound naive, it may sound simple, but it's very simple. If every single South African says no, there is no place for corruption, where do these guys find their market? They have to look elsewhere.
Yeah, Dr. Kershen Pillay, thank you so much for your time. Activist and CEO of the Graduate Institute for Financial Sciences.